All right, so I want to think a little bit more specifically about the relationship between Joseph and his father Jacob, and this kind of epic reunion that we see this week in our Torah reading. We mentioned last week that 20 years have passed since Joseph was sold into slavery in Egypt. And this week's reunion with his father Jacob begets what is perhaps a very obvious and to many of us familiar question. Would it have killed you to write? Sure, Joseph may have been unable to send word to his father when he was still a slave or while he was in jail in Egypt, but he's been at the top of Egyptian society for almost a decade now. What the heck was he waiting for to tell his father that he was still alive, and more than just okay, that he was really thriving? And as I mentioned before we did the Torah reading, like so much else about Joseph and his motivations, at the end of the day, we really don't know. Maybe he was just too busy with work. Running Egyptian society didn't leave him time to write letters or send messages. Or maybe he really had put his traumatic family past behind him, and he was blocking all memory of his family and his former life. Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sachs puts forth another possible explanation. Maybe Joseph was afraid that his own actions had caused his father to stop loving him. The last interaction we have between Joseph and Jacob is, of course, Jacob being told of Joseph's dream, where the whole family bows down to Joseph, including the sun and the moon, representing Jacob and Rachel. Immediately after this dream is recounted, Jacob sends Joseph out alone to check on his brothers who hate him. Perhaps this was, in fact, to teach him a lesson, to put Joseph in his place. While Jacob may have spent the last 20 years mourning his lost son, who he thought was dead, that son, Joseph, perhaps spent the last 20 years thinking that this is exactly what his father Jacob wanted. Judah, as we mentioned, this new leader of the brothers, is the one who finally breaks the ice. In telling Joseph, who he still at that point does not know is Joseph, in telling Joseph that his father is not only alive, but he still is consumed with the pain and suffering caused by Joseph's disappearance, only then is Joseph reassured and ready to reveal himself. We see Joseph soothed and reassured, eager to finally send word to his father and reunite with him. Yet now, after learning that Joseph still lives, it appears that Jacob is the one who becomes fearful. Despite his enthusiasm in the first verse we read this morning, enough, my son Joseph is still alive, I must go and see him before I die. 3 verses later, Jacob sees God in a dream, and the message from God is, I am the God of your father, fear not to go down to Egypt. Those words, fear not, are indicative. Obviously, if God needed to reassure Jacob not to be fearful, he must have been afraid of something. And of course, once again, there's nothing directly in the text that indicates fear, but there are all kinds of different things we can read into this situation. The commentators focus on the fear that Jacob feels for his legacy and his heritage. After all, he is departing the Holy Land, again, a second time, something his father Isaac never did even once. And of course, this isn't just a weekend trip to see his son and his grandkids. This is a sort of exodus in his own right. He's packing up the entire family, and they're in it for the long haul. And the rabbis read into it kind of what the rabbis tend to read into things. They think that Jacob is specifically afraid of assimilation into Egyptian society. He's afraid of the much larger narrative of what will come of this Egyptian exile and eventually slavery. And he's afraid that he is kind of betraying his legacy as the father of what will become the Jewish people. But once again, it's not entirely clear if Jacob knew anything about that prophecy. That's a prophecy we hear made to Abraham. We don't necessarily hear Jacob reflecting on it. And if he did know about it, and if he is concerned, is Jacob really anywhere near concerned enough? If he knows that this is the first step towards his progeny needing to be enslaved in Egypt for generations. So personally, I'm not quite convinced that that's it. And I think that what Jacob is in fact fearful of could be something simpler. I think it would be easy for us to recognize that Jacob's scared. Of course he's scared. Who wouldn't be scared? He's uprooting his whole gigantic household and moving them into the unknown. And more than that, he's built the last 20 years of his life around this sense of loss, around having lost his son. That's what has come to define him. Yes, his initial reaction upon hearing the news that Joseph still lives is excitement. I need to go see Joseph. But at night, when maybe he can't sleep, when he's already on the road to see his son, doubt begins to creep in. He is also scared to see this son, who was his most beloved, who he hasn't heard from for decades. Jacob is having his deepest prayers answered, his wishes fulfilled. But even as we're aware of that happening, when we can feel the joy and excitement, we can't negate the fear and anxiety that comes with facing new and unknown circumstances. And as we find ourselves on the cusp of our own various exciting milestones and turning points, either as individuals or as a society, coming on a new year, as Sharon mentioned, coming on a new administration, starting to kind of build up our own hope for light at the end of the tunnel with news of vaccines. We also, I think many of us are finding that kind of balance between excitement and nervousness. And I don't know how many of us expect God to come to us in a dream and tell us not to be afraid. And I think what we really need to be doing for each other, for our friends, for our family, for our loved ones, is playing that support role and trying to find that kind of golden mean between feeling that excitement and that optimism, but also being really honest about the fear and the unknown that comes with all these new things as well, and playing the support role for each other, so that in those darkest moments of the night, when we're staring up at the ceiling, when we feel that creeping anxiety and that little bit of kind of doubt and fear that threatens to undermine all our optimism and all the hope we might feel, that we know we have the support in place to really overcome that, and to feel the support and love of those around us, in order to really bring the optimism and the hope and the excitement out, whether it's the middle of the night or whether it's, for a couple hours on a Saturday morning, and really gaining that strength from each other.